I'm glad to have had a chance to listen to both Mike and Donna talk about local conditions in Arizona and what sounds like a number of rather remarkable projects to address the environmental issues in the place that you live and love. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes that we have time we have together is to talk about a little bit about the larger issues with climate of which and COVID and how it relates to that, and a little bit about Patagonia, the company I've worked for since 1973. I was 20 years old when I started, tended to stay 6 months, and 48 years later, I'm still here. And talk a little bit about what we see our future is in a time of ongoing environmental crisis. I loved, there are a couple of things I loved in Donna's presentation. One is the puddle with the flowers around it, which I think is going to be a metaphor for our time. And then the second is that every story has an adversary, which I've never heard before, which I really like. And I'd kind of like to start off with what I see as the adversary we're facing. And the adversary we're facing, of course, is us, but it is it is us as a result of kind of an extraordinary success as a species. In my working lifetime of since 1973, population has nearly doubled. And in my working lifetime, the size of the economy has increased 5 to 10 times, both in terms of output per person and also in terms of consumption. So that we're now living on a planet whose resources are quite strained. So on the day of the first Earth Day in 1970, we were not quite using the resources available on our planet, and now we're outstripping it about 1.5 times as a whole on the planet, and 5 to 7 times as much as our resources exist in the United States. So to give an idea of how does this, and we're also 100 times, our impact is 100 times what it was only 200 years ago, both of our economic activity and just our presence on the planet. So the challenges this presents us, and the environmental crisis is 4 or 5-fold, and climate change is the most urgent because, as Donna mentioned or Mike mentioned, we are coming up against an increase in atmospheric temperature of 1.5 degrees. And if we stay within that, we've got a good chance of dealing with the problems that we have. If we exceed that, we're going to face a greater crisis. And we know the manifestations. You know it in Arizona. We know it in California. Having worked for half a century for the same company, it wasn't until 3 years ago that we had a natural event that actually affected 75% of our local employees, where we all had to disperse because of the effects of fire and smoke of the Thomas Fire in 2017. We're seeing in any kind of dry climate, Australia, Arizona, a scary increase in temperatures and incredible risk of fires. I also live on the coast, and sea level rise is threatening about 40% of the world's population. So COVID is an interesting, it's a climate-related problem, and the fact that we are reducing habitat for animals, and we're starting to get what are called zoonotic diseases and create pandemics, of which COVID has been the most universal and the most difficult to deal with, but it will not be the last. The third is land use, and this is something you'd be very sensitive to in Arizona, as anybody is who lives in an atmosphere or in an ecosystem where water is scarce. We have reduced the amount of land where animals can live, where we can farm. We have reduced the amount of topsoil from several feet in the Great Plains to about 6 inches all around the world. We are reducing groundwater faster than we can replenish it. And the last big issue is pollution of rivers from agricultural use and from algae blooms that kill off the fish. So this is the adversary we're facing. And it's a large crisis. It's larger than climate. It's larger than COVID. And it's even larger still when you take into account the tremendous inequality that has developed over the past 50 years all around the world between people who are doing well in the economy that we've developed and people who are not. And it's inextricably linked, the social ills with the environmental ills, and we're going to have to undertake actions that address both. So when we look at the whole picture, and I think Donna spoke well of the need for cooperation, we're no longer in a time where we can all kind of pursue our lives as though we're independent from what's going on in the larger world. We've had that lesson certainly in COVID, and we have that lesson whenever we have a crisis that affects us all. And I think we're going to have a chronic crisis. We believe that at Patagonia for the next 15 or 20 years. And in a way that is sad, and in a way is kind of great, because it enables us to rise to the occasion and recognize the better angels of our nature and actually create a better world than the world we were born into. But it's going to take us all, and it's going to take government, it's going to take NGOs like Donna's, and it's also going to take business. And I think the unique role of business is that we can create self-sustaining economic activity that actually helps improve the world. So I'll give you an example. Patagonia for years had a mission statement that adopted in about 1991 that said, build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. For a long time that we've been talking about the environmental crisis. And at the time that we adopted that mission statement, that second clause, cause no unnecessary harm, was really critical to us, because we had started to pay, or we had started to give to grassroots environmental organizations 1% of our sales as early as 1985, and we regarded it as a self-imposed tax for pollution that we caused. But even up to 1991, we had no idea of what kinds of problems we were generating as a business, because we had a very deep supply chain. We don't manufacture our own clothes, so the clothes were manufactured in factories, and the factories were the fabrics are not made in the factories; they're made in the mills, and that goes back to an oil well to produce polyester and nylon, or it goes back to a field to produce cotton. So, but we started to view ourselves as responsible for anything that contributed to a final product that had the Patagonia logo or name on it. And in 1991, we knew almost nothing about those processes. It was a gradual process of education, and then of saying, okay, oh my gosh, the dye houses are releasing water into the Mekong Delta that's turning the sea indigo, the jeans factories. Or we discovered almost by accident, we opened up a store in Boston, and our employees started to call in sick after 3 days because of headaches and stomach aches, called in an environmental engineer, asked him what the agency was that had caused, in the ventilation problem, that had caused people to be sick. And he said, oh, it's from chemicals, formaldehyde, on the cotton clothes stored in your basement, led to a huge independent study that we conducted on the environmental impact of all our fabrics, and learned that cotton was actually the most harmful, because not just because of formaldehyde, but because of the intense use of chemicals, including organophosphates that were developed as nerve gases for World War II. So this journey, when we started to say, okay, cause no unnecessary harm, this was we didn't know what we were talking about. And we learned over a period of 15 or 20 years, much more about what we were responsible for. And we started to take steps to reduce that impact. But what this is leading to is there was a kind of a discovery when we got into the food business in a very small way in about 10 years ago. And a business called Patagonia Provisions. And when we started to look at food, we got beyond the issue of just looking at reducing the harm. And give you an example. There's a wonderful guy named Wes Jackson, who's a little over 80 now, and his life project has been to restore the Great Plains to health. Just as you love the desert in Arizona, he is a creature of the Great Plains. And the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, he's an agronomist, so he's been developing hybrid plants that might help restore soil to the Great Plains, which was once several feet deep. And that soil was pounded daily by the hooves of thousands and thousands of buffalo. And it was one of the most fecund and richest places on earth. And it's been beaten down by a century of monocultural agriculture, soy, corn, and wheat. And now the topsoil is down to about 6 inches. So anyway, Wes is talking to us. He says, I developed this amazing perennial wheatgrass I call Kernza about 20 years ago, has roots that go 17 feet deep into the ground, that break up the microbes and break up the soil and create perfect opportunity for microbes and fungi to propagate and to create topsoil at a much faster rate than nature can. And when the topsoil is rich and deep, you reduce by a great factor the amount of water you need. You reduce the need for even organic inputs into the soil to help things grow. And you produce this extraordinary opportunity to sequester carbon, to draw it out of the air and deep into the ground. So we said, oh, Wes, this is fantastic. Where can we buy some Kernza? Well, he said, you can't buy Kernza. And we said, why not? He says, oh, no one will plant it. So, well, why not? He says, well, farmers tell me that we can't plant what we can't sell. So what we did is we worked with a brewery in Portland, and we committed to making an ale using Kernza as an ingredient. And we got the first 200 acres of Kernza planted. Experimental farmer in Minnesota. And since then, some pretty major cereal companies have gotten interested in the prospects of doing some carbon farming. And so there's quite a lot of Kernza being grown now. And I think this is an example of what a business can do, because if you're a government and you initiate a project, you've got to raise taxes or print money. And if you are an NGO, you have to raise money, a lot of it from wealthy people. But business has the capability of producing products that will actually meet the needs that we have to survive and to respond and to go beyond the crises we face, and to do it in a kind of self-sustaining way. And if we do it right, in a way that actually helps restore the environment. So what we did at Provisions is we changed our business model, and we said, listen, what we want to do is, rather than sort of chase what we think our competitors are producing or what's hot at the moment. I mean, if you're in the food business, you want to get into coffee or chocolate or smoked paprika, whatever it is that people are into at the moment. We said, no, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is every product has to address a problem in the food system or a problem in agriculture. That's going to be the basis of the business that we're going to grow. That's become the North Star for Patagonia itself, for the clothing business, which is, of course, much, much larger than the little food company. But it inspired us, actually, it inspired Ewald to come in and say 2 years ago, you know, it's time, we've outgrown our mission statement. It's not aspirational enough anymore. It's something that we've all gotten used to doing, build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, and use our business to inspire solutions. It's time to actually up the game for 2 reasons. One is the crisis we've been talking about for 35 years is really much worse and is being felt by more and more people all the time. So it's time to recognize that, and it's also time to act. We've only got 5 or 6 years before the temperature increases at a point we don't know what happens if the temperature goes up over that point. And we're doing business that does positive good. So we changed our mission statement to, we're in business to save our home planet. Now that's highly aspirational. And I would say that when we adopted it, I was worried. I thought, oh my gosh, that is, are we kind of going into the clouds here? But you know, I was wrong about it, because what I saw right after we adopted that mission statement was that everybody in the Patagonia organization really asking themselves, saying, listen, what does this mean for my job? What does this mean for my team? What does this mean for the products we produce? How do we measure up against a mission statement of that level of aspiration? The other thing I wanted to, well, kind of the practical implication, there are 2 practical implications of this. One is, over the next 10 years, what does that mean for not only just for everybody's jobs, but for what we're actually trying to do? And second, what does it mean in terms of our relationship to our customers and the community that we're trying to build? So in a way, our activism becomes quite primary, because we're a business to save our home planet. So our engagement with the NGOs that we give money to, we still give 1% of sales to environmental causes, and we help support about 800 different organizations. That relationship becomes more critical. And second, the activities we're looking at, we're very close, I think, a couple of years away of getting out of any use of virgin fossil fuels for polyester and nylon and going to 100% recycled oil sources or natural sources for those fibers. And we're about 10 years out from being able to produce cotton and hemp by regenerative organic practices. All of our cotton is produced organically, but we're really seeing that as a limited measure. We have to go beyond not using chemicals to actually bringing the land back to health. So that's a little picture of our future. When we look at how we develop the business, the new products we make become part of a larger universe of products of reselling, because we make things to last a long time, creating platforms for resale like warmwear that enable customers to recirculate clothing they no longer wear, and repair, which has become very important to us, the ability to repair clothes that have a lot of life but have one thing wrong with them that might retire them from action. And of course, recycling. We've accepted back for recycling any product we've ever made for the last 10 years. And I think that takes us into, I want to talk a little bit about what that means for local businesses, the potential of this idea of looking at doing positive good. I was just hearing a story yesterday. My wife and I took a hike on a local trail, and I ran into uh, a couple that I had never met before. They had cut down some trees, and we were all worried about whether a hawk's nest had disappeared. And it's mentioning there's a wonderful local business that started up a year before COVID started, called Get Hooked, and it's two women, one of whom was a marine biologist and one from a fishing family, started a home delivery service for locally harvested fish. And this is a big deal because the Santa Barbara Channel is heavily regulated. So we know the quality of the fish populations. We know how they're affected. And I've been subscribing to this for a year. They're doing home delivery of locally caught fish, and also providing it to about 10 different locations where customers can buy it. But what was interesting to me, there's another local business called White Buffalo Land Trust, which is running a regenerative organic farm. And they've expanded. They now have 2 locations. And what those 2 entities have gotten together, because the fish company obviously produces a lot of parts of the fish that don't get used, and that's becoming fertilizer for the local regenerative organic farm. And this potential of one business's waste to become feedstock for another business, I think, is something that can really, on a local basis, help regenerate local economies, to make local economies quite a bit larger as a percentage of the local economic activity, so that the global business is fine. The local franchises of Patagonia is one. We're not a local business. We're a global business, but to deal with the crisis that we're facing, we really need much stronger base in our local economies. And the locality also helps us to address the way these big environmental challenges manifest themselves locally. So, what's happening in Arizona as a result of the climate crisis is very different from how that crisis is affecting the Northwest, or affecting Alaska, or affecting Florida. I think that the last thing I'd like to talk about is a little bit about where our activism will take us over the next 10 years. And I think we're really concentrating in 4 areas, and one is climate, and just a tremendous opportunity right now to really electrify the economy and power that economy through renewable resources. And the second is regenerative organic agriculture, which we have a strong interest in, and that's a strong business interest. We're not in the energy business, but we are growing food and fiber. The third, as I mentioned, is to ramp up the activities of making new products a smaller part of the business. And then the third is support for a movement called 30 by 30, which the Biden administration is recognizing. And this is the preservation of 30% of land and waters by 2030, to give nature a chance to rest, to take critical areas for the survival of species and the restoration of natural systems, take them, minimize the impact on them, and let them heal, and bring them back to life, and let them help heal us. And then the last is environmental justice, because as it has been said, poor and people of color have voices that are the least heard, and they often suffer the greatest impacts. That's where people put the activities that are not going to be accepted by the highly educated and the prosperous, the others tend to feel the effects of that. With that, I'd like to kind of close and ask questions or answer questions. But kind of one final comment. I was really glad to, I think I can't remember when it was. It was a couple of years ago that I visited in person and took part in a summit. I was really impressed because I hadn't been to Phoenix in 30 or 40 years, and I was impressed by the vibrancy of the downtown compared to the 1970s. And I thought the vibrancy of the downtown really owed itself to the development of local business and also to the universities that had placed campuses there. Then a visit to Taliesin West, where you really could see the human interpretation of the desert really close to what you felt the desert had to say to us or how we would live there. So I just wanted to mention that, and with another thanks to Thomas before we start into questions.
Well, thank you, Vincent. I remember, and some on the session today might remember that visit as well, and we appreciate you remembering our home in good light and in good thought. Thank you so much for sharing today. Always grateful for your insight and perspective on what we're dealing with and what businesses can do to play a role in what's happening in the world right now. I wrote down one thing you said and wanted to ask a follow-up to it. You had said business has the capability to produce a product in a self-sustaining way that responds to the needs of the community. That's the power of what businesses have and what they can do. For those attending that might not think of themselves in that way, that may have started a company that wasn't necessarily focused on responding to the needs of the community, but maybe just producing a product or offering a service, how might a business begin to think about reframing or recalibrating themselves, especially after the COVID pandemic, to respond to the needs of the community from both the climate urgency lens, but also just the lens of the needs of the community in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have kind of a, usually I view these as complex complex answers, but this one is pretty simple. I would look at the B Corp movement. And this is a group, there's now about 3,500 of these companies around the world, if people are not familiar with the movement. And what these businesses agree to do is to submit to an assessment every 3 years of how your business affects all your stakeholders. And the stakeholder includes the financial health of the business, but it also includes how you affect your employees, your community as a whole, your suppliers, how you affect nature. And it's a very holistic look at the business. We've been a B Corp since 2012. And I think you can go online and look at what the impact assessment is called, the B impact assessment. And you don't have to, you can just take it yourself. You can just look at your own business in relation to each of the factors that they're looking at. And it really, they get into the weeds. It's, the relationship of the highest paid employee to the lowest paid employee, or whether you're using permeable concrete in your parking lot. So it really provides anybody in a business of any size to look and see what is my impact, and then how can I improve. And the B Corp movement, I think, also gives companies a way to find comrades, to find people who are addressing the same kinds of questions that that you're raising yourself as an entrepreneur. And I also think Local First Arizona has just a strong role to play, because you are connected to the NGOs, you're connected to the government, you've got local people. Again, this whole idea of one business's waste becoming another's feedstock, you've got the potential to build that locally in your state. So that's how I would answer that. It's very hard to retrofit a business. Patagonia did. It's much easier if you're an entrepreneur to start off as a B Corp or to start off with those intentions. But the only other thing I would say is really in response to COVID, in response to and anticipation of the kind of business climate we're going to have in the next 10 years, sit down and identify your values, what's important to you as a person, what you want to be remembered for, what you want your business to be known for, and identify your strengths and identify your limitations, where you're not going to go. Not necessarily what you won't do environmentally, but where you don't want to take your business. And then look at that B Corp impact assessment and be in touch with Thomas.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, Local First can definitely be a resource. I love the adding in the B Corp. We'll definitely include information about that in our resource guide we sent to all of the attendees today. Had another question. You speak, Vincent, with this very warm and calm nature as you're discussing these critical universal issues. You mentioned, it's time to up the game for two reasons. The crisis is worse than it's ever been, and it's being felt by more people all the time. How serious is this for businesses to step up and take action?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's critical. I mean, I think no business is going to be unaffected in a challenging way. And every business has the potential to respond in a positive way. So I think the more we can shift our to necessary products, to things that will actually help improve the quality of life and the quality of life on the planet for other forms of life, and pay attention to the way we do it. I just think that none of us will be exempt from that.
Sure.
Even say McDonald's, right? So they have a very hard time facing the issue of beef, because they're the largest producer of beef, and by some measures, they're the third largest polluter on the planet. But they're also offering alternatives, what they call the PLT. They're also paying attention to their farming practices. So, that take a company that's not known for environmental action and say they're doing a lot in order to reduce the harm they do. So is Walmart, so are a lot of other places. But smaller businesses can actually do a lot more than that, because those big companies are relying on big customer bases and big product chains. So.
Great. Well, thank you for your perspective, for your time, your energy. We're just beyond grateful for all that you do and for spending time with us today. So just want to thank you so much for being here with us.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for your engagement. So
thanks,
good luck.
Vincent.